Hi, it's Maya here with my October wrap-up. I'm a bit behind on wrap-up, so that's why you get the October one and not the November one. Let's get right into it. In October there was a reading event called Victober, which was all about reading Victorian literature during the month of October, and I will go through what I read for that first. So I only finished one book for Victober, and that was Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. And I actually finished this in November. I read about half of it in October, but I finished it in November. So I'm gonna go through it now anyway, since I'm talking about Victober. And this is a sort of a mystery novel about a woman who is a governess who gets married to a rich man, and about a man who is returning from Australia after he has found gold there and is returning home to his wife, now a rich man. But when he arrives, he finds out that his wife has died. And it's more focused on this man and a friend of his, which was a surprise for me because I thought it would be focused on Lady Audley. But instead, Lady Audley is in the middle of this mystery. I say mystery in quotation marks because it was very clear from quite early on what had happened, and the book was still quite long. It was very drawn out. Even after the characters themselves knew what was going on, it still went on for quite a long time. And that's not to say that I didn't like the book, but it was very drawn out, and that's why I went and checked out if it was a serialized novel, because many Victorian novels were published in parts, and I think they were paid by word, so that might be why it is so long. But I still gave it 4 stars, and that is because I really enjoyed the writing style. It was very nice to read, it felt very comfy and very easy to read. And so it was fun reading it even though I knew what was going on. Like I said, I was a bit surprised that it didn't focus on Lady Audley, but later on in the book there are chapters from Lady Audley's point of view, and I really like those chapters. I really did enjoy reading it even though it was a bit drawn out. During Victober I also read this short story, this is one of the Penguin Little Black classics. This is by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, who also wrote Carmilla, and this is called Green Tea. And it's about this doctor who meets this man who keeps seeing this shadow creature around him and is sort of tormented by that vision. And that's basically what the whole short story is about. What I just told you, it's the doctor telling the facts of this case and what the man told him. It was okay. It wasn't anything. It says it at the back that it's one of the greatest Victorian ghost stories, and I wouldn't go that far. But it was a very interesting read, especially how green tea had to do with the whole story. That was sort of funny. But I gave it 3 stars. Another thing that I finished during Victober, or I was cheating a little bit, I finished this on November 1st, was Lady Windermere's Fan by Oscar Wilde. This is a play by Oscar Wilde, and I read this because there was a challenge during Victober to read a play or a poetry or something like that. And this is about a woman who gets told by a friend of hers that her husband is cheating on her, and how all of that unfolds. There are people in love with other people, there's a great party, it's all very dramatic. I gave it 3 stars. It was a fun read, but nothing that memorable. It had a lot of these misunderstandings and Oscar Wilde's classic witty remarks, so it was a fun read. And that was pretty much all that I read in Victober. I also started the Audible audio full cast production of Dracula, but I only listened about 2.5 hours of it during a bus ride that I took when I visited back home. I managed to finish the Jonathan Harker part. I have read Dracula before, so this is sort of a reread for me. But the Jonathan Harker part was very well done. I really like the cast member who read for Jonathan Harker, even though he sounded quite a bit older than Jonathan Harker is supposed to be. I really enjoyed his delivery and how he did Dracula's accent. In particular, I think it was Simon Vance, but I might be mistaken. I need to check this out and make sure. So that was my Victober reads. Then I also read other books, and I will go through them from the one that I liked the least to the one that I liked the most. So the one that I liked the least in October was All You Need Is Skill by Hiroshi Sakurasaka, and this story has a great premise. It's a sort of Groundhog Day where a soldier dies battling aliens and is forced to live that day over and over again, and that battle over and over again. And I have seen the movie The Edge of Tomorrow, which is based on this, and I quite enjoyed it. It was a fun movie, so I thought I would enjoy this one as well, but sadly I didn't, mainly because the main character was a huge tool. He's like 19, he's just out of high school, and he's very focused on women's breasts, and we have to listen to stuff like there are 3 types of women: the pretty, the homely, and the gorillas. Yeah, all that all the time. Also, every single woman gets her breasts described. I was willing to let it slide the first time because it was the first time he had seen a Western woman, but he also did it for other characters. And one time, I'm so sad that I didn't take the quote down, but one time a woman actually arrives on the scene by having her breasts arrive on the scene, so the breasts are described, her breasts appear on his field of vision. So yeah, I almost didn't finish this book, but then, and it's only a 200-page book, but right when I was about to give up, it changed its perspective, or it gave the backstory of a character that I was interested in. The character is Rita, and she is this really badass American soldier who has killed more aliens than anyone ever, and she's either called the Valkyrie or the Full Metal Bitch, and she's really badass. And we were given her backstory, how she got to this point, and that sort of drew me into the novel, so that when it switched back to the main character, I was so near the end that I did finish the book. So there was some good stuff there in the latter half, but sadly didn't save the book. Now I want to read you one quote that I actually found to be the stupidest part of the whole novel. And this is when the main character meets Rita's Native American mechanic, who is also a woman. And this is what it says. I'd snuck a look at her papers. Height, 152 centimeters. Weight, 37 kilograms. Later it does say that she is 158 centimeters, so I don't know which one of these is right, but still 37 kilograms. She's 4'9" and weighs 81 pounds. And that Native American character isn't treated well in the story in general. She is often bullied, and the main character is like, well, she's so short and easy to bully that he sort of gets the bullies. So sadly, I can't recommend this book. I only gave it 2 stars, and the second star came from Rita. Next, I read a graphic novel called Plutona by Jeff Lemire with art by Emmy Lennox, and this is about a group of kids who find the body of a superhero in the woods. And it's only 1 volume long, so it was a mini-series. I think it tries to be this sort of darker character piece, but I really didn't get into it at any point. I didn't really connect to the characters. I didn't really feel like I knew them, which I think would be important in this sort of story. So it's something I read. I didn't like most of the characters. Sadly, I was expecting a bit more. I gave this one 2.5 stars. Next, I read a comics trade. This is Bitch Planet, Volume 1 by Kelly Sue DeConnick with art by Valentin Delandro and 1 issue done by Robert Wilson IV. This is a story about a future where non-compliant women are shipped to this prison planet called Bitch Planet, and they are given this chance to form a sports team, to take part in this sports competition and maybe win their freedom, I think it was. Once again, I didn't connect with the characters. The characters weren't very distinctly drawn, either in art sense or in writing sense. There were about 2 people that I remembered, the main character and a character who got an issue of her own for her backstory, so she's easy to remember. All the other names I sort of forgot. I didn't remember which character was which. They didn't have these clear characteristics in the art, and they sort of just were on the background. So I wasn't that impressed with it. I heard that when the issues came out, there were these feminist essays at the back of them, and I would have really liked to read them, but sadly they weren't included in the back of the volume. So I gave this one 3 stars. I expected to like it a lot more from the premise, but it sort of fell flat for me. Then I read a children's book called Nicholas North and the Battle of the Nightmare King. This is the first book in the Guardian series by William Joyce and Laura Geringer, and this book is set in the universe created by William Joyce that the Rise of the Guardians movie is based, and I really liked that movie, so I was interested in checking out the books. I think there were picture books before these children's novels, but I haven't read those. So the first book is about a character called Nicholas St. North, who is sort of a ruffian, the leader of this group of thieves and robbers, and he finds this magical village led by a wizard and joins their battle against the Nightmare King called Pitch. And this was a fun read. It was very quirky, perhaps too quirky. There was so much stuff packed together with robots and bears and ghosts and wizards, and it just had everything. It didn't really remind me of the movie at all, but what you gonna do? I gave this one 3 stars. It was a fun children's book, but nothing that remarkable. I will check out the other books at some point. Then it was time for another graphic novel. I read Delilah, Dirk and the King's Shilling by Tony Cliff. This is the second volume in the series. The first is Delilah, Dirk and the Turkish Lieutenant, and this is about a swashbuckling adventurer called Delilah Dirk and her friend Selim, who is a Turkish lieutenant. What I really liked about these graphic novels is the art and especially the coloring, although it was occasionally too dark, at least in this volume. I can't remember if the first volume was the same. The plot was slightly better than the first one. It's about Delilah Dirk going back home to England. This is set during the Regency era. As I said, my favorite thing about this is the art. For some reason I can't really connect with the characters as much as I'd like. Although they should be likable, they are, as character types, very likable, but perhaps there aren't enough character moments in it for me. But I do suggest you check them out. The world is quite fun, and you just might like them a bit better than I do. I gave Delilah Dirk and the King's Shilling 3.5 stars. Next I read The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, and this is a book about a very special girl called Melanie who lives in this sort of army complex, and every morning she gets up and gets strapped to a wheelchair while soldiers have her at gunpoint, and they take her to school every day, and that's her life. There are a lot of these special children at this facility. And this was a fast-paced, easy-to-read book. It read pretty much like an action movie. I wasn't surprised when I learned from the interview at the back of the book that the writer was writing the screenplay at the same time that he was writing the book. But I actually saw the movie not a long while ago, and the book is actually more action movie-like than the movie is, which I found to be quite interesting. I don't know if it's for budgetary reasons, but the book had a lot more action in it. What I enjoyed most about this book was the beginning with Melanie at the school, since that was when the book was the most intriguing. I think the book is based on a short story, so the short story I think is about only the school and Melanie's life at the school, so that might be why it felt the strongest part of the book. There was also a cast of characters aside from Melanie, and sometimes I felt like those characters got more scenes than was necessary, but I wanted it to really focus on Melanie's point of view, because that was where the meat of the story, pardon the pun, was. I also really enjoyed the ending. I haven't read an ending like this in a book like this before, this sort of a horror post-apocalyptic novel. Middle part was perhaps a bit too long, but it was, like I said, fast-paced and easy to read, and I gave this one about 3.5 or 4 stars, somewhere along there. Now we're at the second to last book that I read in October, and that was Ombria in Shadow by Patricia A. McKillip. This is about the town of Ombria where the ruler, the prince, dies and leaves behind an heir who is just a little boy. So the prince's great aunt takes over as the regent until the boy is of age, but of course she's really bad and she wants all the power to herself. There are also other characters. Lydia is the mistress of the king who gets thrown out of the castle when the king dies. She was his mistress after the queen died and is just a regular girl from the town. There's also Dukon Grev, who is part of the royal family. He is, I think, the bastard of the sister of the prince, so the cousin of the little kid who is now the Prince of Ombria. And then there's Mag, who is a very interesting character, who is a young girl who is sort of an apprentice and servant to this sorceress who lives below the city. The characters were all interesting, but the thing I liked the most was the writing style. It's very lyrically written. It sort of feels like a fairy tale. I like how not everything is fully explained and how the atmosphere is so magical. There's also this shadow city that exists along with the real city of Ombria, and it's quite nicely intertwined, and it's not fully explained how all this works, but it's still a very satisfying story, I found. I gave this one 4 stars. And finally we get to my favorite book that I read in October, and that was The Red Tree by Caitlin R. Kiernan. This is something that I've had on my shelf for the longest amount of time, and I just haven't picked it up, even though I really do enjoy Kiernan, and I'm so glad that I read it now. This is psychological horror with a great atmosphere. It tells about Sarah Crowe, who is this author who rents out this cabin in New England and goes out there to write because she has a deadline coming up, but she hasn't been able to write after her girlfriend killed herself not that long ago. And while there, Sarah starts to keep this journal, and this book is comprised of her journal entries. She also finds a manuscript left by a previous tenant that collects together stories and myths around the local area, as well as specifically this house and the huge red oak, the red tree in the name, that stands on the grounds. And the red tree is the biggest source of malice and scariness of this book. I have never been that afraid of a tree before. So, not a lot happens in this book, I have to warn it right now. It's more about the atmosphere. It's about Sarah studying these myths and slowly getting caught in this weird atmosphere of the tree and the house. And also there is a tenant that comes later and rents out the upper floor of the house, and she gets tangled up in all this as well. Right from the beginning of the book, you know that this doesn't end well. It starts with a preface from the fictional editor of Sarah Crow's book as she goes to visit this farm, and she tells right at the beginning that Sarah Crow is dead. This is a really, really interesting book, and I highly recommend it if you want some atmospheric horror. One thing I have to say is that I think this cover does a disservice to the book, because it looks like an urban fantasy book where this person goes around killing vampires or something. At least that is what genre I think when I look at this. And there's nothing wrong with urban fantasy, but it's the wrong way to market this book. This is an atmospheric, psychological, sort of Southern Gothic-y ghost story. And I'm really glad that I finally read it. And I hope that you do too, if it sounds like something up your alley. So I've now talked for half an hour. I hope I can edit this to be a little bit shorter. I hope you enjoyed my October wrap-up, and I hope to film a November wrap-up sometime soon. And I will see you all later.